So what we're going to do in this lesson here is we are going to talk about the unit summaries that you're going to do in grade 9 academic math at the end of each one of the learning guides. We're going to talk about why we're doing these unit summaries, and I will go through all the stuff that you're going to need to put in your Unit 1 summary. So you can just copy it down and hand that in as your unit summary. So first of all, just an overview here. At the end of each learning guide, you will hand in a unit summary, which obviously summarizes the key information from that unit. Why are we getting you to do this? Well, number one, it helps you to study for the test. Just to go over this information again, you can check to see if you have missed a topic in going through the learning guide or watching the lessons online. It also lets me check to see if you've missed a topic, and I can remind you about it just before you write the test. These make excellent study notes for the end of the year because it's a brief summary of the key points out of the learning guide and out of the lessons. And when you do your final summative task at the very end of the year in the exam period, you can use these summaries as a reference. So think of these maybe kind of like cheat sheets for that final exam. You want to complete your summary and you want to hand it in the day before you want to write the test, along with your test sign-up slip and your learning guide. And I'm getting you to do this the day before you want to write the test so I can see if there's anything missing and anything that you need to correct before you do your test, so you're ready to do the test the first time. So what should you keep in mind when you're making the summary? What I would recommend doing is to start the summary at the very beginning of the unit, okay, when you do box A to that unit. Each time you complete a box in the learning guide, add the key information from that box onto your summary. Then move on to the next box in the learning guide. And then what you'll find is day after day after day, you'll just add on, and then by the time you get to the last box, your summary will basically be done. And if you're getting ready for the test, you can use this summary as a reference, kind of like your study notes, when you're completing that final unit review to prepare. And if you run into a question on the unit review that isn't covered by your summary, then you can add it on to the summary to make sure that your summary is complete. Okay? And what I'll be giving you is a template page that should you want to use the template page that you can either download from the course site in the hub, in the tracking sheets and handouts module, or you can pick up a paper copy from your teacher in class. And what goes into your summary here? Well, here's kind of what I'd like to keep in mind as you're making your summary here. Tree and then C. And in fact, we're going to do tree and then we're going to do C with a little star, C star. Each of these stands for something. So the T stands for topic. You want to write the name of the topic that you're adding onto your summary. R is for rules, or maybe just rule. If there's a rule or a concise sort of summary of what that topic is all about, you want to write that rule in just after you've written the topic. The first E here is for example or examples. You definitely want to have an example of some sort of a question that you might answer using this topic or using these rules. The second E is for explanation. Sometimes your example is going to require a little bit of an explanation, or maybe you just want to highlight the key features of the example that you've just written. And finally, the C star is for connection. So you want to try, as you're doing this summary, to make connections between the various topics in the learning guide. So think to yourself, how does this topic relate to the other ones? And you can do this sort of for each topic, or you can do them sort of at the end of the summary. Say, or at the end of summary. Sort of list all of the connections that you've come across. And the little stars, because you might want to highlight these little connections just by putting a star next to them. So you might have your explanation and then do a little star and say this relates back to this is what we did before or something like that. Okay? So to show you a little bit more clearly what I mean, let's go through and do our Unit 1 summary. So this is what the template page would look like here. Obviously, the first thing that you're going to fill in is your name. You can put the unit number up here, so this is going to be Unit 1. The title of this unit is Review, because we're just reviewing grade 7 and 8 stuff. Next, you'll see the rubric right here, where you are, which is how it's going to be marked. You're going to be given a mark out of 20 based on this criteria here. Basically, presentation is how well organized it is. So if you list your topics clearly, it'll be well organized. Completion, if you have all of the topics in there, you'll probably get full marks on completion. Communication, let's talk a little bit about communication here. You want to use words, pictures, numbers, or graphs to show your mathematical thinking. So that's partially your that's your example and your explanation of the example. And sometimes you're going to need to draw a little picture or something like that. Computation, is the calculation correct in your example? And finally, making connections. These are the connections that I talked about. So you've got this at the top of the page, and then I would just jump right in, and I would list my first topic. The topic was integers. Okay, underline it to make everything nice and neat. And then I would think about what we did in terms of integers. Well, we did multiply and divide. Okay, so that's like a little subtopic under my topic of integers. And now I want to think about, is there a rule? Well, the rule we had was that if you're doing a positive times a positive, you got a positive. Negative times negative gave you a positive. Negative times positive gave you negative. And positive times negative gave you negative as well. And all of this applied for division as well. So I've got my topic. Okay. I've got my rule. Let's do an example down here. So I'll just say e.g., for example, 7 times negative 4 gives me negative 28. Now I might do a second example here. I might do something like negative 4 times negative 5 equals positive 20. And this might require a bit of explanation. Just remind myself that if I don't see an operation in there, this means multiply. Okay. So topic, rule, example, and then a little bit of explanation on my example right there. Then I might move on to sort of the next topic that we talked about. I've done multiplication, division, then I might, and division, I might do addition here. I might just say, use number line. That's how we did all those examples in there. Something like 3 plus negative 7 equals negative 4, okay? And I might say something like, this is negative, negative, the 7 is negative, so move 7 spots left, or 7 places left. That's my little bit of explanation there, okay? When we talked about subtraction, we said add the opposite. So I did something like 4 minus negative 8. I turned that into negative 4 plus positive 8. And I would then move 8 spots to the right. From negative 4, and so I would end up with 4. Okay. And to make this a little neater, maybe I'll sort of underline each of my subtopics here. That'll just keep things a little bit more organized. Okay, so there, I've done the first box. So then I would go on to the second box. I'm going to start a new page here. Box B was fractions. So let's see, what did we do in fractions? Well, I know we started talking about mixed fractions. Now, if I want this to be a subtopic, I should probably sort of write it out like this, mixed fractions, and then underline it. And then what was the rule with mixed fractions? Always change to an improper fraction before we do anything. And then an example of how to do this. So if I've got 2 and 2/3, this is going to be, well, let's see, I keep the 3 down there, and what goes up here? I do 2 times 3 plus 2 gives me 8, so this will be 8/3. So here I've got my example, and over here to the side I put just a little bit of explanation about how to do this. If I wanted to make my explanation a little bit more clear, I might say, okay, this denominator comes over to here, and that's about it. Then I move on to multiplying. So how did we multiply fractions? Well, the rule was multiply numerators, multiply denominators. Okay. And then we might do an example. 3/4 times -5/2 gives us, let's see, our numerators are going to be 3 times -5. Denominators, 4 times 2 gives me -15/8. And now I might be able to make a connection here. Okay, because in the numerator there I did 3 times -5, I got -15, so here I'm going to put a little star indicating this is a connection, and I'll just say use integer rules. And I might say from box A or something like that. Okay. So I've made a connection between what we did in box A and what we did in box B. So that was multiplying. I might do something like divide fractions. So if I've got something like 3/4 divided by -5/2, what is my rule? Invert second fraction and multiply. And I might just say x instead of writing out the word multiply there. Okay. So I'm going to invert this, change my division to multiplication. This becomes 2/5, and then I multiply just like I did before. So I'll end up with 6/-20, and then I've got to put this in lowest terms, which is going to be 3/-10. Okay? So that might be something that I add to my explanation. I might write in, put this in lowest terms, and a bit more explanation might be, how did I get this in lowest terms? Well, I divided by 2 here, and I divided by 2 right there. Okay? And then finally, we talked about adding and subtracting. I should just say add and subtract. Underline it because it's a subtopic. What kind of a rule did we have for addition and subtraction? I would just might say need a common denominator. And I come up with an example here, -7/8 plus 2 over 4. I know my common denominator here is going to be 8, so negative 7 over 8 plus 4 over 8. Okay? And I get negative 3 over 8 as my answer. So by way of explanation, I might again write in that I multiplied that by 2 and that by 2 to get the 4 over 8. I might make another little connection here to say that, use integer rules to add numerators. And then that would be the end of it for box B. So C, my next topic, percents. Okay. I might give so this is my topic. I might show just something like this, that 35%, I can write it as a fraction, 35 over 100. I can write it as a decimal, 0.35. So this is sort of percent, fraction, decimal. And, maybe I don't need any explanation of that. Then I might show, a couple of examples here. If I want to do 5% of 30, I'm going to change this to a decimal, change my of to multiplication, and get 0.05 times 30, and get 1.5. So I might explain this a little bit, change this to a decimal. Another example might be something like, if I've got 45 out of 75, how do I calculate that as a percent? Well, I just do 45 divided by 75, multiplied by 100, punch it into my calculator, and I get 60%. Then I might move on to box D here, where we talked about order of operations. So there's our topic. What's our rule going to be? Well, I think our rule, you can probably guess what the rule is going to be. We're just going to write out the bed math rule again. B-E-D-M-A-S, okay, brackets, X, I don't need an extra E there, exponents, division, or I'll just say divide, multiply, add, and then subtract. So there's our rule. And then we could throw in an example, 4 minus 2 cubed plus 6 divided by 3. So, and then I would just do this in order. Do the brackets first to get 2 to the power of 3. Then I do my exponents. 2 cubed is 8. And that might be do a little bit of explanation there. Draw a little line off here like this. Remind myself that 2 to the power of 3 is 2 times 2 times 2 plus 6 divided by 3. And then I do my division next. And finally my addition or subtraction. And put a box around the final answer. And I might remind myself over here, making another connection, that I should use my integer rules. So what was our final box here? We're pretty much done here. We just need to talk about, E was substitution. And for this one, well, I might just make up a big example here. 3x squared plus 4xy minus 2z, and choose some values for x, y, and z. And by way of explanation, write out what I do in terms of substitution. I'm replacing the variables with numbers, or their values. And I remind myself that I want to use brackets around those values that I'm putting in. So I'm going to replace my x with a negative 2 for another negative 2 for the x, negative 3 for y. Then I want to evaluate this thing. And here's another connection I could be making here when I evaluate. Here's my connection. I'm going to use order of operations. From the previous unit. So I'm going to do my exponent first. Then I'm going to do my multiplication. Let's see, 4 times negative 2 times negative 3 is going to give me 24 minus 2. Make sure I'm using my integer rules there. And I add that all up, and I've got 34. And that would be my completed summary there. And so I would hand that in when I wanted to write my test.